So you're thinking about moving to Portland, Maine, but you don't really want to live in the city. And you never really hear anyone talk about the suburbs like you would in Boston or New York or Dallas, Texas. And you're like, well, I want to be near Portland. I got to work or I just like the city feel, but I don't really need to be in the city. So what are my options? Well, that's what we're going to talk about in this video today. We're going to talk about the suburbs of Portland, the greater Portland area, and just give a high-level overview of the surrounding towns where most people would just distinguish as the suburbs of Portland. And if you're interested in that, stay tuned. We're going to get right into it right now. If you're new to this channel and you're interested in learning all things about Portland, Maine, and surrounding areas, be sure to subscribe below, turn on the bell notifications so you're the first to learn about the current market in Portland, Maine. My name's Nick, and my team and I, we receive calls, texts, emails every single day, like people like you who are trying to move to the Portland area, and we love helping you do it. So be it 9 days or 90 days, if you're thinking about moving to Portland, please don't hesitate to pick up the phone, shoot us some text, send an email, and we'd be happy to make the smooth move to Portland for you. As mentioned in the beginning, this video is going to be talking about the Portland suburbs. Now, if you're moving here, relocating to Portland, you are probably normally hear people talk about suburbs of a city. And if you spend any time in this area, you're going to find out that we don't really talk about suburbs of Portland. And I think this is probably due to it's a small metro compared to a city like Boston. And instead, you're going to hear the locals really just talk about the towns around the city. Now, just like any other metropolitan area, people commute from an hour away into the city, but what we're defining and what most people define the greater Portland area is the closest 5 to 7 towns that most people would consider the suburbs of Portland. So I'm gonna pull up the map. We're gonna go high view so we can take a look and talk through the different locations. So here we are looking at the map. I got pulled up, and as you can see where my mouse is, we have Portland. And in the previous video, I talked about all the different neighborhoods in Portland in the city limits. So now we're going to focus on the towns around Portland, the suburbs. So first off, there's 3 towns that border the city of Portland. And these are South Portland, Westbrook, and Falmouth. And let's jump in quick right to South Portland. So South Portland, if I can zoom here, if you're just slowing up here. South Portland is right across the harbor from Portland. So there's actually a drawbridge, Casco Bay Bridge right here where my mouse is, that connects the two. And, South Portland is a very desirable, very hot real estate market here in 2022. And I believe it was ranked in the top 10 in 2021 for hottest markets. And that's because you can kind of get all of your living needs in this one town. You have commercial aspects with the Home Depots, the grocery stores. You have, work, people, doctor's office, lawyers, all these things are in South Portland. You also have the residential neighborhoods, the cul-de-sacs, and then you also even have beaches. Willard's Beach, which is over here where my mouse is Cove. It's a very popular area, and it's the closest beach to Portland. So a lot of people just said, you know what, I'm just going to live on the other side of the harbor. And it has been a very desirable area for the last couple of years. And then the next city that next town that's next to Portland is Westbrook. It shares more of the western border of the city. Westbrook is historically a mill town. So if you spend any time down on Main Street, you're going to see the old brick mills along the river. And over the last decade or so, they've been kind of revitalizing the town. And really the last 5 years, we've seen those mills being converted to medical offices, just general commercial space. There's a couple of restaurants, and then we're even starting to see some condos being put in. Now, Westbrook would be, I would consider probably 50% commercial, 50% residential. There's, you can see right here on the map, Market Basket. This kind of large area here from like 302 down to where it says Westbrook is very commercialized. Very few homes in this area. But as you kind of get out here to the outskirts and out to the green area, you get more of the neighborhoods, the cul-de-sacs, and residential feel. But it's a quick commute into Portland. And I'm seeing clients that they're choosing Westbrook over Portland because it's so close and it's not as densely populated. And then the third town that borders Portland is Falmouth. Now, unlike the other two, I would consider Falmouth very, very residential. Falmouth really they have this Hannaford supermarket here, you can see on the map. This is in West Falmouth. And then they have a lot of commercial, more grocery stores, office buildings, the Starbucks, a few car dealerships on the Route 1 of Falmouth. But other than that, it's very residential. Along the coastline, Falmouth Foreside, a lot of people want to live in the ocean area off of Route 88, very tight neighborhoods. But as you go more inland, you get a little bit more space around your house, a little bit more, privacy from your neighbors. But compared to the other two towns that border Portland, Falmouth would be more private. So as I zoom out, now we kind of have two directions we can go for greater Portland. We can go north or south. So first we're going to go north up the coast. We really have three coastal towns that are still considered greater Portland. That's Cumberland, Yarmouth, and Freeport. So as you can see here, Cumberland, his town is not on the water like Yarmouth and Freeport, but it does have a section, Cumberland Foreside, that's along the water here. Out of Cumberland, Yarmouth, and Freeport, and really out of probably all the towns that we're going to talk about in this video, Cumberland is the most rural. Cumberland is where I personally live. I grew up here. And just to put in perspective, Main Street has a bank, a post office, one convenience store, one gas station. That's it. So growing up, if I wanted to go to the movies, I had to either go to Westbrook or Falmouth. If I wife and I wanted to go out on date night, we're going into Portland, going into the city for date night. And even if I want to go buy groceries, living in Cumberland, I'm either going to Falmouth, Yarmouth, or a town we're not going to talk about, but Gray. Those three towns, or even Windham, I can't get groceries in Cumberland. So out of all the towns that are, we've talked about so far, that is probably the most rural, especially for this coastal area. Then you have Yarmouth. Yarmouth has commercial aspects along Main Street, along the Route 1 kind of corridor. Route 1, just in general, through all these towns is probably where you can find most of the businesses, as that was the main form of travel before the highway. But Yarmouth, very residential. I would say probably 80% residential. And then finally you have Freeport. And Freeport, you may have heard if you've ever been to this area, because the flagship store for LL Bean is in Freeport. So as a result, there's a lot of factory outlet stores. Kind of, obviously with the last couple of years, they've moved out. But Freeport, downtown Main Street, Freeport has been the LL Bean flagship store plus the factory outlet stores. And actually, when I was in high school, I worked at one of those factory stores. So other than that Main Street area, though, it is very residential, more rural. And before we go to the south, greater Portland area, I will say Freeport is probably, in my opinion, the furthest north you really want to go in terms of a comfortable commute to Portland. So if I zoom out here, I'm a little too far, but up the highway, up 295 is Topsham. So I lived in Topsham right out of college. My wife and I bought a condo up there. It's a great city. Great. The Brunswick Topsham area is a great location, but for a commute into Portland, it's a little far. It's about 45 minutes if there's no traffic, no accidents on the highway. Obviously, this is no different than having to commute into Boston or New York, But in terms of like you're relocating to the Portland area, as soon as you get past Freeport, it's just, this stretch from Freeport to Brunswick is longer than you think. And then, to be honest, once you get up in this Topsham, Brunswick area, you pretty much don't really need to go to Portland unless you have to work down there. They have the restaurants, the grocery stores, the Home Depots, all those are up there. So there's really no need to even go to Portland. So just in terms of you're looking for relocating, just keep in mind Freeport probably as far north as I would go. And I guess two last towns. Sorry, I forgot. Pownell, North Yarmouth. Pownell and North Yarmouth. These are two other towns that most people would consider Greater Portland. Now, these are obviously more inland. They are almost 100% residential. They barely even have a main street. Now, the two things that are interesting about this, Pownell goes to the Freeport School District. North Yarmouth goes to the Cumberland School District. So these two towns, yes, they're Greater Portland, but there's very low population that they actually go to a different town's school system. So no more on the north side of Greater Portland. Let's look at the south side. So the south would be considered, there's three more towns, and that's Cape Elizabeth, Scarborough, and Gorham. So Cape Elizabeth is a very, very residential area. It's very expensive town. Most of these are because of the being close to the water and close to Portland. But Cape Elizabeth, it's interesting because there's really, as you can see on this route map, I know I'm zoomed out, but really Route 77 is the only way in and out. So you actually got to go through South Portland to really get to Cape Elizabeth. But we have a lot of people moving there. You get the neighborhoods, you get the privacy, and then as you get closer to the water, you get a little bit more close homes, and a little bit on top of each other, but beautiful coastal area. And next you have Scarborough. Scarborough is probably I would say 50-50 on commercial residential. The South Portland, Scarborough kind of shares where like the main mall is. So there's this big stretch of what the road is here. I guess it's Route 1. Big stretch of Route 1 is where like the main mall is, and Scarborough has a lot of commercial stuff there, especially right when you get off the highway. But there is residential pieces to it. The interesting thing about Scarborough is I would say this is probably, other than Willard Beach in South Portland, Scarborough is where the closest beaches are for the Greater Portland area. So as I mentioned, I live in Cumberland, which you can see is way up here. This is downtown Cumberland. When my family and I want to go to the beach in the summer, we drive all the way down to Pine Point, which is right here where my mouse is, in Scarborough. So living in Scarborough, you can be closer to the water, and you kind of get that, like, I don't really need to leave my town limits. I have everything here. So just, interesting that, keep that in mind, that for like a beach, if you want to be near the beaches, Scarborough is a great town for that, or just be prepared to have to drive a little bit, to get to the beach. Then the last town that most people consider Greater Portland is Gorham. And I think there's probably a mix on this, if people would consider it or not. But Gorham's a great town. I have almost all my extended family lives in Gorham. And they have it's been commercialized on, Main Street. One of the state colleges, University of Southern Maine, has a campus in Gorham. So it's a great little community. It has the fields, it has the farms, and it's a quick drive into Portland. You either can go through Westbrook or Scarborough to get into Portland. So I would consider that, if you're okay with not being, not having part of your town be near the water, Gorham is a great spot to go to. And before we wrap up, I just want to say Windham. Windham, I think, is a hidden gem. I live in the area, so I have family that lives in Windham. So I spend time there quite often. And I don't think most sites wouldn't classify Windham as Greater Portland. And I think that's a miss because it's super quick into Portland. There's a couple different ways. You either can go through Westbrook into Portland, or you can go right down 302. I guess technically still goes through Westbrook. And it has your residential. It has your residential in the bulk part of the town, and then it also has a commercial like zone, North Windham. Like that's where Home Depot is, the grocery store. I don't know. I think there's some used car dealers there, but not not new cars. But anyways, Windham, hidden gem in terms of if someone wanted to move to Portland, was doing a Google search, it probably wouldn't come up on the Portland suburbs. So keep that in mind as you're doing your search. Keep Windham in the consideration set. So there you have it. That is Greater Portland, the suburbs of Portland. As I mentioned, you're going to probably not hear locals refer to these as suburbs, but rather just their towns. Just like any other metropolitan area, metro area, they have their own zip codes, and the locals just refer to them as the town names, not, oh, I live in the Portland suburbs. Now, yes, if I'm talking to someone from across the country, I just say I live outside of Portland and leave it at that. But if you are trying to relocate here and you don't need to live walking distance to everything, you're okay with a little commute, okay with not being in a condo, an apartment building, and you want maybe a little bit of a yard, consider these towns for where you're looking to relocate. They all have pros and cons. Some have more commercial than others, but I think are all great options if you're looking to relocate to the Portland, Maine area. And as I mentioned at the very beginning, my team and I, we're helping people every single day make this move to Greater Portland, make the relocation to this area, and we love it. So pick up the phone, give us a call, shoot us a text, send us a message on Instagram, send a carrier pigeon, send a mail boat. However you need to get a hold of us, we'd be happy to make the smooth move to Portland.